And we are live. So welcome everybody to another Q&A. Um, so today I actually got a lot of questions about Nick. Can you talk about the home invasion of Anthony Smith? What happened to him? Can you do a breakdown or an analysis on it? So I watched all his interviews, and first I just want to say to him, if he watches the video, or probably not, happy to hear and glad to hear that his family is safe. So that's the first thing. The second thing as well is my hat's off to him for being so brutally honest, for giving the reality, for expressing and being so authentic with his experience. Because there's a lot that we can learn from what happened, right? A lot of things that when I heard him share his story, I said everything he's talking about is totally normal, as much as it doesn't seem to be normal, especially from a perspective of a UFC fighter, of somebody who trains just to fight, right? So I took a lot of notes that he talked about in most of his interviews, but specifically more from one. So, the first thing is when we look at the attack, the guy that broke into his home, was either probably under drugs, obviously mentally unstable. It was an average 165-pound guy, wasn't a fighter, breaks into his home. He came in through the garage because he forgot the door open. Again, misunderstanding. He thought his wife was gonna close the door. He thought he had closed the door. Guy breaks in 3, 4 in the morning. Now again, we're gonna look at the difference between fighting in the street and fighting in the ring, the mindset, the psychology, the what actually happens, and why did he have such a hard time taking out a guy who's 165 pounds, who's not a fighter, and at the end still managed to get up and was fine, and he was like kind of blown away from it. And again, he said a lot of key words in there that we could pick up and learn, but I've actually been saying through many of my videos in the past, the difference between fighting in the ring, fighting in the street, the survival, and the mindset. So first of all, this guy's an average 165 pounds guy, not a fighter, 23 years old, breaks into the house. And I remember him saying, the first thing is, he was in shock. And he doesn't know him, doesn't know if he has a weapon, what is he doing in his house? That moment is that moment that people will experience, whether somebody's breaking into the house or when you're facing with somebody in the street, who's about to pick a fight with you. It's normal for you to start going, who is he? What does he want? Why is he picking a fight with me? There's a moment of shock, and there's a moment that is that is scary, and he talks about it. There's that you don't know this guy. You don't know his mindset, his belief. Is he out to kill you? And that's the scary part between fighting in the ring and fighting in the street. When you're fighting in the ring, you know who you're fighting. You've prepared for him. You know his strengths, his weaknesses. You know there's no weapons. You pretty much know more or less the outcome and the frame of the fight. When you're fighting in the street, and I remember working in the clubs, and I'm face to face with the guy, the scariest thing is, I don't know his mindset. I don't know if this guy's gonna come back and try to shoot me. I don't know if he's gonna be some psycho who's gonna wanna find out who I am and try to hurt my family. That is the big significant difference. And the mindset that comes with it is, one is very sport, where you kind of, again, know the frame. And the other one, it's a scary thing because you don't know, even after the fight, even if you quote unquote survive or beat him, you don't know the aftermath of the fight. You don't know what's gonna come with that as well. And he talks a little bit about it in his video at the end of the video, which I'm gonna mention. So let me go through some things he said. He said it was the toughest fight of his life. Now, here's a pro MMA fighter who trains for this, and this was the toughest fight of his life. Why is that? Because the adrenaline of fighting in the ring and fighting in the street is completely different. At one point he said, I thought I was gonna gas out. So he goes, I'm giving him everything I have, and I've knocked out fighters, but he couldn't knock out this guy. Why? Again, and this is factors that you need to take in when you're fighting like when you're defending yourself or being attacked or fighting in the street, whatever you want to call it, is the mindset, is the guy under drugs, alcohol, is he mentally, these like people who are under the influence could take a beating. I remember working at the club. We're three guys on one guy, and we're going at him because we're trying to take him out. And the guy's on cocaine, he's on drugs, and he's telling us, I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna fucking kill you. And he's screaming at us while we're beating the shit out of him. What happens is, because of all the drugs, his face, he doesn't feel anything, plus add the adrenaline. So what is the best solution in these type of scenarios is you gotta choke the guy out. That's the only thing that works. Again, obviously, even if you strike him in the eyes, if you're in close quarter, he's still gonna be able to fight. Even if you bust his nose, even if you crack him in the throat, the throat shot might help slow down his wind. But the best thing is, if you're faced with somebody who's on drugs, alcohol, somebody who's unstable, you gotta choke him out. Now, the other thing is too, people who are, sometimes we look at, people who are either schizophrenic, bipolar. You see these guys they're just naturally super strong. They have this adrenaline and superpower, I call it, as well, because of the mindset that comes with it. He thinks he's unstoppable, unbreakable. He believes in that he's, super strong, and therefore that adrenaline carries that. I love the fact that he said at one point, he broke into his house. He was fighting him, and he was under adrenaline because he was fighting for his life, Anthony Smith. But what happened too is when the predator prey switch, when you start defending yourself and you become the attacker and he becomes the prey, he's fighting for his life as well now. So what happens? He starts to escalate the violence or his adrenaline to try to catch up to yours. So at that point, it's two people fighting both for their life, right? It's two people going fully all out. So, so I love the fact that he said when he was face to face with him, he knew he had about 2 minutes to destroy him. Now, here's the thing too. When we're looking at a home invasion, from what he was sharing from his story, he knows he has 2 minutes. What's the main thing? Protect the kids, protect the family. You have no option to run. So he knows that this is a fight. You can't just run and leave his family there. So whatever happens, he's got to go through him. Now, luckily, this guy went into a UFC fighter's home, right? If he would have broke into, like he says, the neighbor's house or somebody who wasn't a fighter, what would they have done? Again, it's hard to say because at that moment, whether you're a trained fighter or maybe you're not, again, when that survival mindset comes in and you know that you're there fighting and protecting not just your life, but your family's life, again, that mindset and that adrenaline and that survival, that primal animal that's wired in us will come out. So, so don't as much as you might be a fighter or might not be a fighter, at that moment, you really don't know fully how you're going to react. So like he said it was like two guys fighting for his life. What was interesting, another thing he said after the fight, he was angry. So what does that happen? Why does that happen? And I remember when I used to work in the club, after a fight, and the fight was over and the cops were there and suddenly everything starts to set in, meaning because when you're in the fight, you don't realize, you don't have the time to break and analyze everything that's going on. Because you're in fight or flight, you go into automatic pilot, you will do what you've trained to do or whatever your instincts will be or your survival instincts will kick in. But after the fight, when you start realizing what just happened, that's when the adrenaline comes down. You might start feeling heart palpitations, you might feel shaking, as well as the anger comes in because you just realize that you just fought for your life, that this guy broke into your home or this guy tried to take your life, and then something kicks in where you snap and you just want to Like the anger comes in because you start realizing everything that happened at that very moment. And I remember, again, I always relate this to working in the clubs, is that I would remember after the fight, my adrenaline would go and I was so fucking mad because I was like, holy shit, I almost died. Or this person tried to actually, do something crazy, or like this was just completely chaotic, which I love one thing that Anthony said, it was chaotic. Guys, fights are not sport. They are chaotic. He fought for like 5 minutes almost, which was way, like, past most people's threshold. And he was fighting under the desk, and he gave this guy everything he had, and he was taking all it. And he said it was chaotic, because that's what happens. Real street fights, self-defense are chaotic. There's cuts, bruises, stabs. It's not, this sport where you're sparring and you're going back and forth with each other. There's screaming, falling. There's so much unpredictability in the fight, and your environment that you're in will also dictate that, as well as the circumstances around it. So it is chaotic. Again, I'm gonna go back to my real life scenarios, working in clubs. The first time that I was in a real brawl in a club, it was the most chaotic thing I experienced. And I never even came close to any of my scenario training that replicated that, right? It was full out. We didn't know who was hitting we didn't know who was who. We didn't know who was hitting who. Bottles were being flown everywhere. And at that moment, even though it was me and the guys I worked with, just trying to stay completely clear in that moment is extremely hard. And again, the best way to do it is, as much as possible, train hard, do scenarios to duplicate or replicate what you would face, and make them as hard as possible. Try to make your training harder than what you would face in real life. And challenge yourself, meaning do drills with lights closed. Do drills where you're blasting the music where you can't hear. Do drills from a chair. Do drills from the floor and there's stuff around you. Make your training as hard, as unpredictable, as chaotic as possible, so you don't short circuit when the time comes. And hopefully you don't get in that situation. Now the idea is create as many different type of trainings, but obviously it is impossible for you to train. And I loved, he said it too, I didn't train for this fight, right? You don't know who your attacker will be, if he's gonna be armed, his mindset. You're training, but you don't really know who your attacker will be, how he's gonna look like, how he's gonna attack you, the time or date, and everything that will come with it. So, he also said he roughed up the guy badly and the guy just got up. Again, under adrenaline. When I make knife defense videos, people are like, oh, you got stabbed, you would have died. Again, I always say, the moment you die is the moment you give up fighting. If somebody's attacking you, whether they have a gun and they're shooting at you, they're stabbing you, they're beating you, if you're in a fight, give them a fight. Work on that mindset. If you're in the fight, give them the fight. The fight ends when you give up. The moment that you say, holy shit, I'm dead, there's nothing I can do. If that's your mindset, I'll tell you something, chances are the moment you get into fight, you will crumble and fall. Your mindset has to be win or lose, do or die. I'm going down in a blaze of glory and giving this guy everything I have until the very end. That should be your mindset, and train for that. It was interesting because he said his skills obviously did come in handy. His MMA, his jiu-jitsu, his wrestling did come in handy. So, I mean, not to say that, MMA is not good in the street for self-defense. It is. Obviously, he was able to do it. Now, could maybe striking the eyes, striking the throat, maybe using your environment, picking up an improvised weapon. Again, they're not MMA fighters are not trained for that. So even though he did amazing, obviously he managed to survive and he looked fine. You know, train as well to also create blueprints and train yourself to have those different options to pick up improvised weapons, to learn how to use your environment, to go more in that type of situation. You have to go completely apeshit, primal, and lethal because you're protecting not only you, but most importantly, your family. I love the fact that he said, at one point he said he felt kind of insufficient, that he was scared. And that's probably the most common question I get. It's like, man, I was so scared. Guess what? It's normal to be afraid. It's normal. You will be afraid in a street fight. You will be afraid when you're fighting outside of the frame that you've trained to or conditioned to, because you don't know what will happen. You don't dictate to a certain extent the fight. Meaning, if you get sucker punched or you get stabbed and you go down, nothing says that he's gonna stop because you're down. You hit the ground, he might jump on top of you and start stabbing you. His friends might jump in and start kicking you. That's, again, the dangerous part of fighting in the ring and fighting in the street, is that unpredictability and the fact that you do not have any control of the outcome of the fight, and you don't know, more or less, what can happen. Again, in the ring, I always say, worst case scenario, you get knocked out, you get a concussion, the chance of dying again are slim. So you kind of know more or less of what to expect, worst case scenario. In the street, worst case scenario is death, right? Or even worse, being, paralyzed or injured or hurt for the rest of your life. He also said he felt violated, which is true, right? After the event, he goes, he felt violated, the kids were scared. And I remember when my house got robbed, I was 11 years old, and I went to the house and the door was open. I was going upstairs. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I remember saying, Ma, Ba, and I knew that, they're normally not home. I was 11 years old. I was already had the key around, opened the door, and I would stay home until my parents came at 6, 7. And I remember going inside the house, seeing the door open, and realizing, holy shit, we got robbed. And I remember that scary feeling where I froze. And I'm like, I'm 11 years old now. I'm like, okay, what do I do? And I still remember, and I was like, I walked, and I knew I should have left the house, but for some reason I felt like I'm supposed to protect the house. So I remember being like that, a little kid, and I started walking through the house. It was a very small place, and being like looking around if there's a robber, and then going to the kitchen and seeing the back door open, and then like calling the cops, and the cops telling me, okay, leave the house and go to someone's house. I went to a friend's house until the cops came. So, and I remember feeling that feeling of being violated, of having somebody come into your home, destroy it, intrude it, go through your personal stuff. So there is a psychological effect to it. And he said it as well that, I can't remember if it was him or his family, he was having, I think it was him, he said he was having nightmares about it. And another story that I can share when it comes to that, when you are in this type of, fight for your life. I remember, and I share the story, when I worked at the club, I saw a kid get stabbed. I wasn't there when he got stabbed. I was there. I was one of the first ones to get to the body. And I remember the kid was bleeding, and I was like there supporting him. And then maybe like 2-3 minutes, whatever it was, the cops came and the ambulance came, and then I had to like leave. And I remember hearing the sounds of this kid dying and going home that night after the club. And for a week, I couldn't sleep. For a week, when I would close my eyes, I remember him saying, I'm cold. And he was like shaking, like out of a movie. And I remember that was a traumatizing experience that I never ever forgot. And I remember that week Again, I couldn't sleep, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. And till today, I still remember exactly what the kid looked like, exactly what he was wearing, because shit like that, you know what I mean? You don't forget. And it was at that very moment I stepped up my training with knife defense. I said, holy shit, when you see the dangers of a weapon, when you see the dangers of what a knife could do, you don't take this as a joke. I don't take it as a joke in terms of what I teach self-defense, especially when it comes to weapons, and more, especially when it comes to knife defense. So, I felt bad and feel insufficient. I don't know, I didn't know it was possible for him to be terrified. And, you know, it's normal for him. Now, we're talking about a UFC fighter to be terrified. Why was he terrified? He goes into the ring, he fights, he's not terrified. Why? Again, we fear the most what we don't know. And in the ring, he more or less, in the cage, he more or less knows the frame of the fight, whereas in the street, he doesn't. So the fear comes in, right? The fear comes in. The important thing is, what will you do with that fear, right? It's normal for you to be afraid, right? So if you catch yourself being afraid, you gotta shake it off in 2 seconds. You gotta get that out of your head, and you gotta say, fuck, the fight is on, I gotta do what I gotta do to survive. You cannot fight and think at the same time. It is not the time for you to start doubting your skills, your ability. It is not time for you to get into your head and think about, holy shit, he's so much bigger, I could never beat him, he's gonna take me down. The instant you put that doubt in your head, it's you against him and you against yourself. Guess what? You are outnumbered, okay? So you gotta, and at the same time, when you get in your head, you're missing moments of time that are happening. That means you're missing the awareness, the verbal cues, the physical cues for you to be ready to go preemptive and strike, or be ready to counter as quickly as possible, because while things are happening, you are busy in your head. So you got to get that out of your head. And I loved what another thing he said. He goes, there was no warm-up. It's not like, you know, he gets to warm up, he stretches before the fight, he hits his pads. You got to be ready in these situations. You got to be able to fight at exactly the position you are and your mindset that you're in. That means if you're in a, you know, if you're feeling depressed and anxious and sad because, I don't know, you had a bad day at work or your girlfriend dumped you, your attacker doesn't really care about your emotions at that. He's not there to sympathize with you. He's there to attack you. So you don't have the time to prepare mentally or physically or the positioning of the attack. When at that very moment, you just have to fight and do whatever it takes for you to survive. And that's very important. And that's why I do scenarios from sitting down, lying down, being in a car, outside a car, being in a staircase. Change the environment so you can get used to fighting in different environments and different positions. You know, you could also do drills where you handicap yourself with, you know, say I'm gonna fight, like I have a broken arm with one arm attached to me. I'm gonna fight with, you know, and use one arm, or imagine that, you know, I busted my leg or I can't walk. Put yourself sometimes, again, the reason why you do that is just to create to try to create as well that the mindset that no matter what's happening at that moment, you got to do what you got to do to survive. And by creating handicaps, you're also conditioning your mind to be able to say, okay, it doesn't matter. I can still fight through this, and I have to, no matter what the situation it is. I couldn't sleep. It made me feel like a sissy. This one's a good one, guys. This one's a good one. I remember sometimes working in the clubs, and there was moments where I either didn't fight or defend myself against the guy, meaning I diffused it. And then I would go home and I felt like a pussy. I felt like a sissy that I didn't do anything. And that recorder plays in your head. Fuck, I should have done something. I should have beat him. Why did I let him do that? He embarrassed me. I should have stood up to him. I should have told him. That is the worst thing that you can do to yourself. And I've been there and I've done that. And now I say to myself, if I fight, I fight. If I don't, it's because I choose not to, because I assessed the situation, I was able to diffuse it. But there's no point of you beating yourself after about something that you didn't do, could have done, should have done, right? And again, that's the hardest thing for you guys to learn, but we've all done it. We've all done it. I know I've done it. I'm sharing with you guys real shit that I've done. And sometimes I beat myself for the longest time because I said, you know what? I should have stood up to him. I should have told him, fuck off. I should have told him, you know what? Come here. You want to go? Let's go. But sometimes you just got to know how to let shit go. You know what? Again, a fight not fought is a fight won. Remember that, okay? It was chaotic. There was blood everywhere. Again, that's why we do scenarios, guys, with blood. I did knife drills where we put blood on the guy's arms and you realize that as you're getting cut and shit, like the fight still goes on. The fight is still there, right? So, you know, when we're trying to trap and the arms are sliding because the blood becomes like a lubricant. We did that on Code Red Defense. You realize, holy shit, suddenly, even the blood, my blood is becoming a factor to me helping me trap the knife. Another thing he talked about, at one point, he thought maybe he had a knife. So he goes, he's trapping with one hand and he's striking with the other because he didn't know. Again, we're looking at knife defense. It happens so fast. Sometimes you don't know if the guy has an attacker. You almost have to assume that both his hands are weapons. And at one point, he's holding his hand and he's realizing, holy shit, I'm trapping with one hand and I only have one hand to fight. Guess what? You know, that's why when we train knife defense, we actually train to trap with one hand, strike with another. Trap with one hand, strike with another. Trap, pin, strike. If you don't train it, at that moment is not the time for you to figure out, oh, can I trap with one hand and strike with the other? Which is my stronger hand? How should I strike him? Again, this is why in all your training, add weapons, add knife defense. In all your training, add that weapon because it is the most common weapon, more than a gun, especially a knife and a gun. A knife is a lot more dangerous in close quarter range. To go back to the gun, he 99% of the time he says he carries. At that moment and that day, he didn't have his gun on him. Again, guys, when people tell me about weapons, you know, the best weapons you have are here. They're always attached to your body. They're always ready to go, whether you're in your shower, in your car. You know, you're not always going to have the opportunity to pick up a gun. And in close quarter range, 4 feet, a knife will always take over a gun, even under 10 feet. I've done this with 22 feet with police officers in New York. Every time we did under 22 feet and somebody said go, I managed to stab him before he pulled out his gun, right? So don't rely on a weapon. The difference between an improvised weapon and relying on a weapon or being emotionally attached to a weapon is you're always carrying the weapon with you with the idea that it's gonna help you. The improvised weapon is you being able to assess a situation and condition and train yourself to be able to pick a lamp, a chair, anything you have to smash his head in anything that you can get or pick up anything you can to strike him with. So this is why, again, we emphasize a lot on improvised weapons. He had a security system, but it wasn't on. Again, having a security system is great. I'm going to be doing a video on home invasion, by the way, guys. I'm going to be talking about all of this, but having a security system is great, but you can't just rely on that on 100%, right? If for whatever reason you forgot it, it didn't go off that day, and it doesn't really matter because the time somebody breaks into you, like you said, it took about 5 or 6 minutes for the police to come. So when people tell me, oh, well, I live in a good neighborhood, which he says nothing ever happens in this neighborhood, you know, I have security, there's a police officer, you guys have to understand and learn that all those are just added, you know, they're added measures of security. At the end, you got to learn to protect yourself because at that very moment, you got to calculate that if you were to be attacked in the street, in your home, in any type of environment, by the time the cops come there, even if somebody were to call them the moment the fight happened, you're looking at least 5, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 2. But 2's enough for you to get stabbed or shot. So what does that mean? You got to learn how to empower yourself and learn how to defend yourself, right? You got to take that responsibility upon yourself and empower yourself and build your own confidence. I don't mean you need to become the top black belt, UFC, MMA fighter, Krav Maga expert, but learn at least the basics of awareness, diffusion, de-escalation, preemptive striking, how to set up a strike, how to escape, and if you need to, how to survive. Even if you were to get stabbed 2 times, well, 2 times is better than 20 times. Even if you were about to take 2 or 3 punches, 2 or 3 punches are better than 20. So, just learn. And it's no one's responsibility. It's not your neighbors, it's not the police, it's not the security in your building. It is your life. You need to empower it, and you learn how to defend it. And I always say, nobody will fight for your life better than you. Nobody. So you have to learn it, guys. You have to do that. He hadn't been in a fight in 15 years, a bare-knuckled fight in 15 years, right? And now he's in a fight of his life. So again, and he said it, he goes, I remember my hand hurts. Again, I tell people, hit open hand instead of punching. You could bust your knuckles. The UFC fighters, they wear those gloves. They're not wearing their gloves to protect the other guy. They're wearing the gloves to protect their hands, and their hands are their money, right? If these guys were doing bare knuckles, I could guarantee you more than 2 or 3 fights, they wouldn't be fighting anymore, right? Maybe they would, but chances are they'd be busting their knuckles, right? And after that, you're out of commission. I've seen big guys, strong guys, bust their knuckles, and a lot of times people fight, they flinch, the guy's hitting them on top of the head, guy gets up, this guy busts his knuckles. So, yeah, so I'm gonna take everybody's questions. So like that's why I say, guys, hit open hand, hit palm strikes. Did I miss anything? The guy had a history of mental illness. A history of mental illness, right? So again, when we're looking at bipolar, schizophrenic, manic, these, I don't like using the word, people who have any type of mental instability, believe it or not, some of these guys are strong, man. Some of these guys are like, the adrenaline they have. Again, adrenaline could with adrenaline, you could take a lot of punishment. You could also give a lot of punishment, right? And the adrenaline, that fight or flight between in the ring and in the street are completely different, right? So in the ring, your adrenaline, right? You coast it, meaning you actually have, you pace your adrenaline. You cannot fight a full-out fight in the street like you're gonna fight in the ring. In the street, what happens is your adrenaline is gonna go from zero to 100 in a split second, because you're gonna be fighting for your life. After about 30 seconds, you're gonna see the adrenaline is gonna start coming down, right? If you're a trained fighter, the idea is for you to be able to go at least 2 to 5 minutes. Again, not in the ring, in the street, right? So I know it goes boom, the adrenaline starts to kick in before the fight. Your heart might start racing. There's a fight or flight. You're gonna have the option, either a run or a fight. The instant the fight goes on, boom, automatic pilot kicks in, everything shuts down, vital organs are at their highest, and the fight comes in. Your body will naturally do, but you won't have the adrenaline to fight for 5 minutes, right? He did, and he even said he was afraid and worried that he was gonna run out of steam. Again, it's a trained fighter. Why? The adrenalines are different fighting in the ring and fighting in the street. Okay, so I got here a whole bunch of questions. So, guys, there's too much stuff. All right, guys, so I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like and share, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell. If you guys want to learn more self-defense, go visit my website, nickdrossos.com. I'm asking you guys, stay safe and stand strong.